Hey everyone, so I wanted to go over the new refactored design for Sandbox client. So the new Sandbox client is the main entry point where we will be vending the Sandbox handle through which the customer can interact with the Sandbox. So the Sandbox client has some basic methods to create a sandbox, to get a sandbox. So this is like once a sandbox becomes active, we return back the handle to the user. Then we also have methods like delete sandbox, list active sandbox, and delete all the sandboxes in case the script is terminated or when the user is done using or interacting with the client. So let's go over this one basic method called create sandbox. So in create sandbox, all we do is we create the sandbox claim, wait for it to be ready, and then instantiate this persistent handle. Along with instantiating this sandbox, we are also starting to track the sandbox which we just created under active connections. So let's go into the sandbox persistent handle to see what's happening. So as you can see, sandbox handle currently it has only terminate method, but we can extend it to add other methods like status of a sandbox, suspending a sandbox, resuming a sandbox. We can even extend this functionality for snapshot and restore as well. We can add methods like list snapshots, create snapshots, or delete snapshots. Along with these methods, which are like the methods exposed at the root object level, we also have cores and file. So core and files are basically namespaced engines which we use to interact with the sandbox. So we pass in a connector so that the user can basically execute or run any command through the core namespaced engine and read and write to any files using the files namespaced engine. So let's go over what the connector does a little bit. So connector, as you can see, we are instantiating here when we basically define or when we basically instantiate the sandbox object itself. So sandbox connector basically starts an HTTP session where it can manage the connection pool for each sandbox. So let's see. So in the sandbox connector, we basically have the connection config which is passed all the way from sandbox client. So based on this connection config defined by the user, they can select which connection strategy they are going for. They can either connect via the port forward method or the gateway method or the direct URL method. So based on each of these strategies, we basically implement connect, close, and send request. So connect, as you can see, is nothing but like we basically define the strategy and we implement the specific connection logic for it. And close is very similar. We basically close all the connection. And the last method is the send request, which basically starts sending the request via HTTP session request to the server. So let me just also go over one of the namespace engine. As we saw earlier in the sandbox handle, we also have the connector being passed down to core execution. So all this core execution is doing is it's basically like running the command which is sent by the user, and we send this request via the connector to the server who is listening or who has the endpoints defined for execute. Let me just show you a demo of how everything looks like when we run this. So this is actually an example of the client tests. We can also run it, but the test is going to be super fast, so I also wanted to just manually go over to show you what's happening. So as we said, like when we define the client, we basically create a sandbox. So I created first sandbox here, then I can create a second sandbox, and the second method is like listing all the active sandboxes. So you can see we have two of the sandboxes active right now. For example, like if we want to connect to the same sandbox again, we can use the get sandbox method. And we can see the reattach sandbox is the same as the original sandbox here. And then we have additional methods like the terminating sandbox, which is the delete sandbox method. And then finally the delete all. The delete all basically deletes all the sandboxes and the length becomes 0. So let's just try to execute it. So you can see we are trying to create the first sandbox here. This one got created. Now we're creating the second sandbox, and then everything else is super fast because it's just interacting with the client. So yeah, this is like the new framework for Sandbox client.